That day, I texted Faye again, asking him to assist me in resolving some strange events that happened in my family. I quickly informed Faye that this was an emergency, but strangely Faye didn't say much this time. On the contrary, he even invited me to his home to make it easier for us to talk. I dashed out onto the main street and took a taxi to Faye's house. The taxi pulled over to an empty and quiet residential area that appeared to be a resort. I followed Faye's direction message to an opulent mansion. I was so taken aback by what I saw, I even felt dizzy. Faye's house was an unexpectedly large and magnificent mansion. To enter, I showed the security guard Faye's picture and informed him that I was his friend. After hearing the guard's instruction to find Faye's room, I came to a room and began knocking. Faye weakly came out from the room with a haggard look on his face. Faye sat in the chair looking exhausted, and I was so concerned, I inquired about Faye's health. He coughed and said he had a common cold, then asked me in a weak voice about my business. I approached Faye and I told him that I had just received a call from a relative on my paternal side who informed me that the deceased great-grandfather in the family had miraculously resurrected. Faye sighed and looked at me with a twinkle in his eyes, saying he couldn't accompany me this time. I considered Faye's health and could understand the inconvenience. However, only Faye could help me with this case. Faye, seeing this, reassured me and struggled to find something. Then Faye gave me a business card, instructed me to go see this person. This young man's name was Alpha, and he was the owner of a small funeral goods store down the street, according to his business card. Faye also informed me that Alpha, who was quite close to him, was a talented shaman. Following that, Faye instructed me to rush to his address, find Alpha, and explain that Faye had introduced me to him. Then he would agree to help. I quickly stood up and prepared to leave when Faye reached into his pocket and handed me a coin. I picked up the change and looked at it, perplexed, but then realized it had to be because Faye wanted me to wear it as an amulet. Then I went outside, grabbed a taxi and hit the road. I sat in the car, told the driver the address, and kept my gaze fixed on the business card in my hand. The car raced to a small town in the center of the city, surrounded by rows of busy stores. I followed the address until I came to a small funeral store at the end of the street. I walked over, gently opened the door, and called out loudly for someone, but no one answered. I went inside and was captivated by the colorful paper dolls in this place. I couldn't take my gaze away from the oddly shaped paper dolls until someone came from inside and stood in front of me. When I looked up, I noticed a man with long, flowing hair, similar to that of a woman. I introduced myself that I was Faye's friend, and I needed to meet the owner of the shop, Alpha. The young man in front of me introduced himself as Alpha and invited me into the store to talk. When I looked at him, I noticed that his personality was similar and cold to Faye's. He sat on the ground, expertly crafted a doll, and asked if I had come to find him. I also sat down next to Alpha and told him about my family's situation. My great-grandfather died a few days ago in my hometown. There was a young niece in the family at the time who organized his funeral. Funerals were also held in a straightforward manner. The coffin lid was not in a hurry to close because relatives from far away were expected to attend. His eldest son, who was also my second grandfather, consoled and assisted this niece at the funeral. Every night after the funeral, something strange happened in the niece's house. She was awakened every time the clock struck 12 o'clock that night by someone calling from outside the room. She unintentionally looked at the window and noticed a dark shadow moving across the curtain. She couldn't tell who was outside in the darkness, but she knew it was a man. She dashed over, gently lifting the curtain with her hand. Her eyes quickly focused on the body of her great-grandfather, who had just died in the house, which she had not expected. His body looked so frightening, resembling a zombie, and he even jumped around the house like a zombie as well. She She was so terrified that she dashed to the door to double check if what she saw was true. She shivered, hid behind a wall and opened the door slightly to look outside. Outside, the horror and gloom scene made her exclaim in shock, standing motionlessly as if she couldn't hold on. The great-grandfather's body approached her, revealing his face and figure with red spots on his body. She was so terrified by what she saw that she covered her mouth with her hand and took a trembling step back. She sat against the wall, cried, and promptly fell asleep. When she awoke, everything was back to normal, and the body of her great-grandfather was no longer in the house. She went into her room to check, but nothing had changed inside. She couldn't forget what she saw, so she went to the location where the old man's body was placed to examine. She took her time walking towards the altar room, took a deep breath, and then opened the door to the room. She took a chance and went to the old man's coffin to look inside. She peered inside the coffin and saw his body, which still looked ruddy and lying still in the coffin as if nothing had happened. She exhaled a sigh of relief, believing that everything was still normal and that it was most likely due to a dream she had the night before, so it was all an hallucination. Something suddenly drew her attention. When she looked down at the souls of her great-grandfather, she noticed that the top was dusty, just like the front porch of her room. She began to panic and tremble as she realized what had occurred was completely real. She took a step back, unsure how to deal with it, when a gentle hand on her shoulder made her jump. When she turned around, there stood my second grandfather. It turned out that he also stated that not only she, but he as well had the same problem. Since the great-grandfather's death, his spirit had appeared every night. He was jumping back and forth in front of the room, making the niece very scared. She guessed there was something he couldn't get rid of, so his spirit kept coming here, which made her very sad. So she called and asked for my assistance. I told Alpha that because Faye's health was deteriorating, I needed his help. Alpha finished the bamboo frame for the doll and stood up as soon as I finished my story. He went inside to gather his belongings and told me to follow him out of the car so we could go to my great-grandfather's house. He led me out of the store and told me that because of the emergency, he would drive himself and that I just needed to tell him the location. At first, I noticed Alpha approaching an old and battered family car parked in front of his shop. I thought he was about to get into the car, but then he used the remote to unlock a luxury car that was hidden next to it. Alpha accelerated that supercar down the highway. There was no doubt in my mind when he told me to let him drive so it could be faster. Sitting in the car, I nervously discussed my great-grandfather's issue with him. I had the impression that he was very cold, as much as Faye. It seemed that all shaman had this thing in common. I sat in the car nervously asking Alpha about my great-grandfather. He sighed and said coldly, "Surely the great-grandfather was controlled by someone else, but he couldn't have come back to life and just become a demon." After the answer, Alpha went silent again and drove. Alpha drove the luxury car into the village. My whole village stirred and talked about his wealth. I led Alpha into the courtyard. My great-grandfather's young niece came out and greeted us. After a few conversations, Alpha got to work. We went to the shrine room, where the great-grandfather's body was kept with a very calm face. I slowly walked forward, looking at my great-grandfather's body lying in the coffin with mournful eyes. But when I looked closely, my great-grandfather's body still surprised me a bit. My great-grandfather's skin was pale as if he had lost blood, and his face was also full of small puncture holes. I glanced slightly at Alpha. When I saw the smile on his face, I knew he understood where the problem was. When we were out, Alpha asked my great-grandfather's niece to take him to see the elderly man's memento. The girl was also a bit confused at first, but then did as Alpha said. She unlocked and gently opened the wooden door, inviting us inside. The whole room exuded solitude, quiet and old. There was not much furniture inside, mainly the antiques of the great-grandfather. Alpha calmly went to look at each item carefully. His eyes were also a little interested. I stood behind Alpha with the granddaughter, asking him how to solve my great-grandfather's problem, but he was not in a hurry to answer and suggested that he and I should rest, eat and wait until evening to act. The granddaughter prepared Alpha and me a cozy meal with my favorites. After eating and drinking, Alpha suddenly called me to follow him to the shrine room to start acting. I looked at Alpha in bewilderment, but before I could ask any more questions, I saw him come out. I hurriedly chased after Alpha into my great-grandfather's shrine room. Probably because it was night, I found the room cold and gloomy. I stood in the distance watching Alpha pull out a large doll from the wooden chest he was carrying. Inside the wooden chest there were many papers, pens and ink of all kinds. He was painting something I didn't know while asking me to tear off the pieces of paper surrounding the doll. After listening, I went over to help him tear the paper outside the doll. At the same time, Alpha started mixing glue, putting it in a small bowl, looking very attentive. He took out a large brush and used it to apply glue to each thin bamboo stick to form the doll's frame. Next, Alpha skillfully took each piece of paper that he had painted earlier and applied it to the frame. Alpha looked over at me and said he was using the perpetrator's own method to get the perpetrator. After a while, Alpha created a doll with the exact same color and shape as a real person. Finally, Alpha told me to go out the window and see what fun was about to happen. Alpha and I stood by the window, looking out into the dark and quiet courtyard. I was curious and confused about Alpha's way of doing things, my heart rising with suspense and anticipation. After a while, Alpha whispered, "It all started." Then he motioned for me to stand aside to avoid being seen. I peered out through a small gap in the window. In the yard, I saw that my second great-grandfather was holding a small wooden box, acting very mysterious and strange. He left the box in the middle of the yard and quickly ran to the shrine room. He took the key, frantically unlocking the door at a very fast speed, as if he was carrying out a plan. Then he opened the door and quietly entered the room to hide. At this point, I seemed to have understood the matter. My second great-grandfather did this for some evil reason. I kept watching him and then looked down at the wooden box that was placed on the field. It started to move like there was something inside. Not stopping there, the great-grandfather's shrine room also began to emit very strange rustling sounds. A moment later, two arms with long sharp claws suddenly popped out. To be precise, that was my great-grandfather. His face looked very scary with many pinholes. He jumped up like a zombie straight to his niece's room. Alpha and I silently stood in the back and watched everything happen. Before I could stop being surprised, Alpha took out a brush from his pocket and dabbed a red dot between my forehead and his. He enjoyably performed with some walking movements like a normal person. After that, the doll he made before also started to go out, following Alpha's instructions. At this time, a similar red dot appeared on the doll's forehead. Following the command, the doll went straight to the shrine room past my great-grandfather's body. Then it went inside the shrine room. The sound of my second great-grandfather's screams resounded with fear. I saw him run out quickly, followed by Alva's doll. He panicked and ran out of the house, forgetting to take the small box. Then Alpha pointed at the center of the doll's forehead to disconnect from it. I got angry, turned to Alva and asked him to chase after my second great-grandfather to get him to ask questions. But Alpha shook his head and stopped me. I looked at him in surprise. He said I didn't need to hurry. Just come and see what was inside the wooden box on the ground first. I obeyed him, crept forward and trembling opened the wooden box to check. I didn't expect there to be anything scary inside, but just an ordinary frog. Only its eyes were wide open and there were sharp needles on his head. I was surprised that before I could understand it, Alpha was standing behind me. He told me to try pulling the needle out of the frog's head. I was curious to try. I pulled out the needle. Blood splattered. At the same time, my great-grandfather howled again and spat out a puddle of water inside his mouth. Immediately my great-grandfather fell and lay stiff, motionless on the ground. Alpha and I also ran over to check it out and saw a bigger needle on top of his head. Alpha pulled out the needle and put my great-grandfather's mouth open wide. A frog suddenly popped out of his mouth. Then Alpha and I took my great-grandfather's body back to the coffin. I thought it was over, but unexpectedly Alpha told me another story. Alpha told me this was a very old method and my second great-grandfather was also plotting to harm the younger niece. As soon as Alpha finished his sentence, he asked me to run to the room of my great-grandfather's niece quickly. I told her about the whole thing that made her scared and hurt. After that, Alpha went to the place where a precious vase was displayed. He looked at it for a while, then confirmed that it was a truly precious artifact. I panicked, my mouth gaping open in astonishment when I learned the true value of these items. But Alpha said that some of the items were antiques in museums and were stolen a long time ago. The atmosphere in the room immediately became tense at Alpha's words. I also told Alpha that my great-grandfather most likely bought them from thieves. Alpha now turned to ask the granddaughter about the memento that my great-grandfather left her. She said the memento that my great-grandfather left her was not an antique at all, but just an ordinary pendant. Then she took off the necklace she was wearing around her neck and showed it to us. Looking closely at the shape, it looked a bit strange, similar to a petal. Alpha seemed to have realized something. He immediately carried his necklace straight ahead. He stood looking for something on the wooden cabinet for a long time. Then he gently put the pendant in the missing part of the cabinet. Unexpectedly, her pendant matched that missing part. Dust from the cabinet flew out and also opened a small drawer. Alpha hurriedly took out the item that was placed in the closet. It was an abacus made entirely out of famous gems. Alpha gave this abacus to the granddaughter and told her not to let it fall into the hands of my second great-grandfather. Finished, Alpha and I said goodbye to the young girl and left. Alpha's car rolled and took me home. On the way, Alpha took the coin from his pocket in the morning and gave it to me. I looked at him bewilderedly, listening to him talk about today's wages. I thought he would pay me well, but I didn't expect it to be such a large amount. I screamed in panic, but Alpha didn't seem to mind. But that was okay because my great-grandfather's niece took care of this. Now I understood why magicians like Faye and Alpha were so rich.